What is up, guys? Welcome to the Making Progress show, and today we're going to be talking about monopolies. Now, I thought I wanted to make a video on monopolies because I feel like there seems to be this narrative that's being perpetuated by some pretty influential people that seem to suggest that monopolies are actually a good thing for the average working class, middle class person. So, for example, you have people like venture capitalist Peter Thiel, who, and I quote, "Americans mythologize competition and credit it with saving us from socialist breadlines. Actually, capitalism and competition are opposites." So basically what Peter is trying to say there is that the more competition that there is in the markets, then the worse off we will all be. So the less competition there is, the better off we'll all be, right? So more power going into the hands of fewer and fewer companies. That's a good thing for all of us. Now, if there's one thing that I want you guys to take away from this video, it's that is just so far from the truth that the opposite is actually true. And so we'll get to see what exactly I mean by that over the course of this video. What I will say here is that the reason why Peter is saying that is because the only people who stand to benefit from this growth in monopolies that we're seeing are people like Peter Thiel, who has boatloads of money invested in these monopoly companies. Of course, this, as we'll see, is at the expense of everybody else in the economy. But before we actually set the record straight, guys, I wanted to address a potential question that you guys might have, which is, why should I care so much about monopolies? Why can't I just avoid these companies? Nobody's forcing me to engage with these companies. And what I will say to that is, unfortunately, it's not that easy. It's becoming increasingly difficult to avoid these companies just because of the sheer magnitude in which they're dominating each and every market. So just to give you guys an idea as to how far the rabbit hole goes when it comes to monopolies, let me actually show you guys the stats. So right now, only 5 corporations control food, 5 corporations control defense contracting, 4 corporations control home internet, only 1 corporation dominates books. The entire pharmaceutical industry is a monopoly, and the list goes on and on and on and on. And so my whole thing is, rather than avoiding these companies, why don't we actually tackle them head on, prove to people that they are harmful, and actually try and come up with solutions to prevent this growth spurt in monopolies that we clearly see happening in the markets. But guys, before I actually explain to you what exactly is the harm that is caused by monopolies, let's first figure out what exactly do we mean by a monopoly. So the textbook definition of a monopoly is the exclusive possession or control of the supply of or trade in a commodity or service, meaning that this company owns 100% market share. Now, I'm going to modify that definition a little bit over the course of this video. So when I say monopoly, I don't necessarily mean companies that own 100% of their market. I'm saying situations in which there is limited competition and there is very few companies that exist within a market. This is also what's known as oligopolies. However, rather than me trying to switch between, the word oligopoly and monopoly, for the sake of simplicity, I'm simply going to use the term monopoly to mean companies that exhibit monopoly-like characteristics, and we'll come to see what exactly I mean by that. So guys, with that out of the way, let's actually talk about what is the harm done by monopoly companies. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about is that monopolies actually create lower wages for workers. So according to a recent study done by several economists, monopolies are responsible for wages declining by 15 to 25%, meaning that just because there are not a lot of employers to choose from in a given market, otherwise known as monopsony, you have now lost 25% of your overall income. Now, I don't know about you guys, but that's not a small chunk of change to me. especially during this period in which, the pandemic has caused job loss, and for those who are lucky enough to still have a job, they've had to take wage cuts. And so the fact that monopolies are responsible for a 25% decline in wages, it's not really helping with the issue of the average working class citizen. And guys, that's not the only reason why monopolies are harmful. The second reason is that monopolies cause higher wages for consumers. So according to a recent study, between 2004 and 2013, the price of hospital admissions went up an estimated 113% simply due to monopolies. So to recap then, the quality of the service didn't go up. It wasn't more efficient. You did not get literally anything in return for that over double the price of what you otherwise would have paid had that market not been dominated by monopolies. Now, some people might hear this and say, especially if you lean more to the right, well, Andre, you're just cherry picking, right? Not every monopoly company price gouges. Look at Walmart, for example, right? Aren't they a monopoly? And look how cheap their prices are. So doesn't that suggest that there are instances where monopolies actually help the working class by making things more affordable? And to that, I would say, yes, first of all, Walmart is I would call a monopoly company. Second of all, sure, even if we assume that, prices are cheap at Walmart, that doesn't necessarily mean that these monopoly companies like Walmart are harming somebody else, some other working class person on the other end of the spectrum. So what exactly do I mean by that? Well, in the case of Walmart, for example, this is a perfect instance of this. While prices might be cheap on the consumer side, that's not because Walmart's some benevolent company, some well-meaning company. That's because they're squeezing their suppliers. So let me elaborate as to what exactly I mean by that. So according to a recent study done by the USDA, between 1990 and 2009, the farmer's share of each dollar consumers spent on pork fell from 45 to 25 cents, while profits of Walmart and other supermarket chains are going up, pocketing 61 cents of each dollar, up from 45 cents in 1990. So in other words, farmers are getting poorer because of monopoly companies squeezing their profits, keeping it in their pockets instead, and obviously paying out wealthy shareholders like Peter Thiel and Warren Buffett. And so if there's anything that I want you guys to take away from that point, it's that, monopolies are screwing over the working class somewhere, right? If they're not screwing over the consumer, that doesn't mean that they're not screwing over anyone. That means that they're screwing over somebody else, being, your local neighborhood farmer who's just trying to make a quick buck to get by. So either way you look at it, the point being is that monopolies are in direct contradiction to the interests of the working and middle classes, and the only people who stand to benefit, of course, are these wealthy shareholders that own these companies like Buffett and like Thiel. And guys, there's so much more that I could talk about. Monopolies lead to fewer startups, which harms innovation. Monopolies lower productivity, etc., etc. But in the interest of time, the point I'm trying to make is that, like I just said, monopolies are in direct contradiction to the interests of the working and middle classes. And so I think it's fair to say that for everyone watching this, we want to reduce the amount of monopolies as much as possible. We want to increase competition if we want to increase productivity, increase wages, increase the profits of your local neighborhood farmer, and so on and so forth. So the question becomes, of course, what exactly can be done to break these monopolies down, to increase competition? How exactly can we solve this issue? We need to figure out what's actually causing this growth spurt in monopolies, this decrease in competition, this increase in concentration into the hands of fewer and fewer companies. So what exactly is responsible for this growth in monopolies? Now, I think it's fairly obvious what the issue is here. The issue is a long history of deregulation in the markets. Now, when I say deregulation, I mean this idea that we're all going to be better off if the government doesn't get involved in our markets. We let the market be, we let the free market decide for itself. And, the smaller the government, the better off we're all going to be. We hear this a lot, of course, by conservatives who hate any sort of, government involvement in our markets. Now, In the context of monopolies, I hope we've established that, if anything, deregulation is not making us all better off, it's making us all worse off, right? It's lowering wages, lowering productivity. So what exactly is it about governments failing to intervene specifically that has caused this growth in monopolies? Well, it's a little something called antitrust laws. And antitrust laws is basically a fancy word for saying laws that are specifically created to break up monopolies. And what we've seen over the years, ever since Ronald Reagan came into power, there's been a gradual erosion of antitrust laws, specifically when it can be enforced and the powers that these laws actually are able to do. So if we want to actually come up with a solution to this growth spurt in monopolies, we don't actually have to look too far to do so, because we've already come up with the solutions. It's just a matter of bringing those laws back, not only bringing them back, but bringing their powers back. So some laws that come to mind is the Sherman Antitrust Act, the Clayton Antitrust Act, which when combined was able to go after companies who exhibited monopoly-like characteristics like price fixing, price gouging, etc. And there were some pretty serious consequences if you actually were one of the business owners that engaged in monopoly-like business practices. Things like fines, but even actually courts could go as far as to imprison you if you actually engaged in these practices. So given the sheer magnitude of monopolies that dominate our markets, the consequences as we've established that stem from them, I think it's fair to say that those types of laws, isn't a far stretch. It's not, unnecessary. I think it's absolutely necessary, and it's something that we are in dire need of if we want to break these monopolies up and allow the working and middle classes to prosper. But guys, as always, that's just my opinion. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Do you agree with me on monopolies? Do you think that, monopolies are actually a good thing? Do you agree with my diagnosis as to what I think has caused this growth spurt in monopolies? Do you think it's deregulation, or do you think it's something else? Do you agree with what my solution is? Let me know in the comments down below. And of course, if you liked today's video, make sure to smash that like button, hit subscribe, hit that notification bell. It lets me know that you guys like these types of videos, and it motivates me to continue making more. So once again, guys, thank you so much for watching. And as always, I will see you next time.